Greetings, fellow songwriters and seekers, and welcome back to Muse and Measure. If you have not done so, please kindly hit that subscribe button down below. Help us get us to our goal of 1,000 subscribers by November 1st. All right. I want to talk about melody and scales today because we've covered this idea of scales, that every kind of tonal center has a series of notes that are like a ladder that you can use with that note, and it creates a whole harmonic structure. It creates this kind of sense of home and away from home. There's stable notes and unstable notes. And so every scale usually has, at least in the Western system, usually has 7 notes. Of course, there's scales like the bebop scale and all kinds of other scales that have more or less notes, but for our purposes here, we'll just stick with major and minor scales. We'll get into those other more interesting and exotic scales later on. So just maybe in the key of C, since that's the easiest scale to learn about because it doesn't have any sharps or flats. It just goes up the alphabet. C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay. So if we know that those are in our wheelhouse or our palette of colors to use, then the question arises, what notes should we use? And are all notes created equal in this system where we have, is obviously the home note, C, maybe the major note, the tonal center for everything. And we have the fifth, which is the dominant. That also has some power to it. And I talked about this when I talked about the overtone series, that when you go through the overtone series, which are the naturally occurring tones that also vibrate when you hit a string. So we think that we're just hearing one note there, but there are subtler other notes that are also vibrating. And if you've not seen this video yet, I will put a link down below. You should watch that first to understand why certain notes have more stability and other notes are less stable. So obviously the root note C is the most stable, and then the third of the scale is also stable, and then the fifth is the second most stable. So these two together are very stable together notes. And so what does this mean for melody writing? Well, if we think about melody like a character, the root note is going to be home for them. That's where they're the most comfortable. Also, the fifth is like maybe their vacation home or their cabin out in the woods, or it could be their work. It's away from home, but it's another environment where they feel safe and relaxed. And then the third is maybe, a friend's house. It's not as stable, but it's pretty stable. They're not feeling queasy or out of their element there at all. So those three you can think of as nice home bases. My daughter loves to play tag, and so there's certain safe zones, little areas where they can go stand where they're not afraid to be tagged. So you can think of those 3 notes as being those safe zones for our main character as they go on their little journey. And a melody is like a journey. You usually start at home, and maybe you immediately take off and go someplace way out there. Most of the time, though, it's gradual. It's maybe too jarring for us if we see a movie or read a novel and then immediately they're in a horrible, perilous situation. Of course, there are suspense movies where immediately the character has somebody they love killed or some horrible traumatic event. But it usually goes back into a much more gradual thing after that trauma. So let's listen to these various notes and just discover on our own what sounds stable, what sounds unstable, and what is the tendency for these notes. What note do they want to go back to? So if I'm away from home, whatever note I land on, it's going to make me either want to go to my home, my work maybe, or my second home, if you are one of those privileged people who can have that. I used to be one of those privileged people. I'm not anymore. But, that's an option for some people. Or like maybe a friend's house. So what is the closest place for that person to go? And so here's home. C, la. Now the second scale degree is D. Na, na. So I'm going to play the root note, and then I'm going to sing the D. La. Now that to me sounds like tension. It's not an extreme amount of tension. It's not like ah, but it's still uncomfortable. I don't like it. So the tendency for the second is to go back home. It's like you step outside and you step outside your own home, and all of a sudden a blizzard hits you in the face, you're feeling uncomfortable, you want to run back inside. So if you're on this second scale degree, often where you want to resolve is back to home. Na, na, na. The third is one of the stable notes. It's less stable than the first or the fifth, but it's already stable, so it's totally fine to land there. Let's listen to the fourth. I'll play that. That seems pretty stable, but in harmonic theory, it's not stable. It was for probably 1,000 years, but it's been deemed unstable now. And so the way that the fourth wants to resolve is also backwards. Na, na. Okay, the fifth is very stable, doesn't need to go anywhere. Let's listen to the sixth. Na. Doesn't feel horribly unstable, but it still has a longing to go somewhere. So that one also wants to go back to the fifth. So na, na, na. Unstable, stable. So you might be noticing a trend right now, which is that the unstable notes in the beginning of the scale want to go back. They want to go move backwards. They run back to home, or back to a stable note. They don't run further afield to try to find some other future note. The only note in the scale that does want to move forward is the major seventh. And that one feels very, very unstable. Kind of like nails on a chalkboard. If you invert this so that you take the two notes but put them side by side instead, that's really dissonant. Okay, so that we have the major seventh there. So this is the one exception. This doesn't want to go backwards because it's too far to go. It would have to go da, da, da. It'd have to go 2 whole steps back to get to something that's stable. But guess what? 1/2 step up from this seventh is home, back to the C. Na, na. So just to recap, the second na, 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 goes back to the 1. The 4 goes back to the 3. Na, na, na. The 6 goes back to the 5. Na, na, na. And the 7th is the outlier. It wants to move up. Na, na. Now this is, if you were to read The Steps to Parnassus by Fuchs, which was the great book on music theory for hundreds and hundreds of years that Mozart and Beethoven studied. This all is part of that too. This is what the species counterpoint teaches. And we'll get into that later. But you can use this to help you when you're writing melodies, especially when you find yourself landing on one of these dissonant notes. And how you can use this is, as we talked about before, you want to end a musical phrase on one of these consonant sounds. You don't want to end on a dissonant. So you'll want to end your melody after 4 measures or 8 measures, however long your melody is. You probably want to end either on the 1, the 3, or the 5. Most likely you're going to want to end on the 1, but it's also fine to end on the 3 or the 5. The 1 is the most stable. You just want to ask yourself how comforting you want to be in your melody. And if you want to be the most comforting, you will do the 1 or the 5. And if you want to just be slightly comforting, they can give it the third. So the way to build tension, though, to make the story exciting, is to use those other notes as a means to kind of take the character out of their comfort zone so that it feels so much better to go home. If you're always just sticking towards home, that's an okay melody, but it just doesn't have a lot of tension to it, as opposed to a little bit more interesting and a little bit more tension there, so that when you return back to home, it feels that much better. So you use these tension notes to spice things up. And if we go back to the metaphor of the character, you are God, just like the author is God in these situations, and you get to say what's going to happen to this character. What trials are you going to put them through? Now, you want to have some kind of happy ending if you're following, what's expected in Western harmony, which most of your listeners are going to expect of your melodies as well. But you can also use this to kind of deceive and trick and have surprise cliffhangers in your story as well. So you might end on a... So we talked about this in previous videos where we have this what's called the antecedent and consequent. So the antecedent is kind of the question. And when you think about the way people talk when they ask a question, they do the up talk. So, have you ever been to Minneapolis? Up talk at the end. And it's very annoying when people use up talk even when they're not asking a question. So I went to the store and I saw a dog there. It's just this weird thing because like your brain is saying they're asking a question here. But really what they're doing is they're wanting you to say, uh-huh. They're basically asking for a call and response at that point. Anyways, that's a digression. So you're going to use these those tensions as the question, and then the answer is one of the three of the stable notes, the 1, the 5, or the 3. So I could start a phrase with boo dee doo 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 dee. So there I ended on the 4, and that makes it end unstable. Like I can't just leave it there. I have to resolve it. Then I go boom, dee doo doo, dee doo doo, dee doo doo doo, ending back at home. So that could be the antecedent and the consequent, or the first half of the melody and the answer, which is the second half of the melody. So you can use this tension release to create melodies which are very satisfying. And they're satisfying because you've caused problems for this character that the listener then wants to be resolved. And that's really a very nice little trick and a way to use the notes of the scale. Get to know what their role is in the story. It's not necessarily good guy and villain, but it's like home, away from home. And then some notes are really far away from home, like the major 7th, that has a lot of tension to it, that really wants to resolve back to home. So you can use that, especially towards the end of your melody, to really feel that longing for home, which makes going back home all the more pleasant. Because if you just stick around your front yard and maybe you walk out into the street out front of your house, you're not going to feel that, oh, thank God I'm home feeling. But if you go on an adventure, you travel halfway around the world, and you're away from home for a long, long time, we all know that experience of coming back home, and what a great relief that is, right? So that's how you use these notes of the scale to build tension, to build kind of a narrative structure, and just to make your melodies more interesting and also much more satisfying in the long run. All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I will see you next time on Muse and Measure.